The phone rang once, twice, before Emily finally answered. Her heart raced as the distorted voice on the other end sent chills down her spine. Emily, they're coming for you. You can't outrun them anymore. You need to make a choice now, or it's over. The words echoed in her ears long after the call had ended. Her fingers trembled as she stared at the screen, the weight of the message pressing down on her chest. Who was this? And more importantly, why was she suddenly the target of a dark, twisted game she never signed up for? The cold, hollow feeling in her stomach grew, but there was no turning back now. Everything she thought she knew about her life, her family, her past, was it all a lie? Could it really have been so easy for someone to slip into her world, to manipulate everything from the shadows? With every clue she uncovered, the questions piled higher, and the answers became more elusive, more dangerous. Who could she trust? And what had Nick, the man she had once loved, really been hiding? Was he the key to the truth, or was he the one who'd betrayed her from the very beginning? Emily felt the walls closing in as she took her first step toward the dark unknown, not knowing if she'd survive the night. But one thing was certain: if she didn't uncover the truth now, everything she held dear would be lost forever. The clock was ticking, and there was no way out. Emily sat on the edge of her worn-out sofa, a grim silence filling the small apartment. She stared at the empty can of baby formula resting on the cluttered coffee table, the scene around her one of quiet desperation. The hum of the old refrigerator, its sound a constant in the background, reminded her of the monotony of her struggle. The small apartment, with its peeling wallpaper and dim light, felt more like a prison than a home. Yet, amid all this, her thoughts were consumed by one thing: Lily. Lily, her daughter, lay asleep in the next room, her tiny form curled under the blanket, completely unaware of the storm her mother was weathering. Emily's heart swelled with love and protectiveness as she glanced toward the door of the bedroom. She would do anything for her little girl, but the crushing weight of financial insecurity and the daily grind to make ends meet was taking a toll on her. Every day felt like a battle, and tonight was no different. The formula for Lily had run out, and there was no money left to buy more. With trembling fingers, Emily reached for her phone, the bright screen flickering to life in the dim light of the apartment. Her heart raced as she typed out a message to CLA, her closest friend and confidant. Emily had been in this position before, asking for help, but it was becoming harder each time. She hated the feeling of weakness it brought, but her daughter's well-being came first. The text was simple, but laden with emotion. Hey, can you lend me some money to buy formula for Lily just until payday? I'm so sorry to ask again. Her chest tightened as she hit send, the words on the screen a stark reminder of how far she'd fallen. This wasn't the first time she'd needed help. It wasn't the first time she'd swallowed her pride and asked for a handout. But every time, it felt like she was sinking lower, and the burden was becoming unbearable. She waited for the familiar buzz of a response. But then something happened that she never could have expected. Her phone buzzed, but not with CLA's name. No, this message had come from someone else entirely. The name that appeared on her screen sent a jolt of cold terror through her body. Nick, her ex-husband. The Nick who had walked out on her years ago, leaving her to pick up the pieces of their broken life. The same Nick who had risen to become a billionaire tech CEO, a man gracing the covers of magazines and attending galas while she struggled to get by in her small apartment. The man who had shattered their family, who had left her to face the world alone. Her fingers hovered over the phone, the message from Nick flashing on the screen before her. Wait, I'm coming over now. Emily froze, her blood running cold, panic shot through her veins, and her breath caught in her throat. No, this couldn't be happening. Her pulse raced, a loud thud in her ears, as she tried to gather her thoughts. Her hands trembled as she typed a frantic response. "Oh, sorry. Wrong person. Ignore this." But before she could even process what was happening, the phone vibrated again. Her heart skipped a beat as she saw a new notification. It was from her banking app. Curious, yet fearful, she opened it. A moment later, her breath caught in her throat, her chest tightening with a mixture of shock and disbelief. A $1 million deposit. Her mind raced, trying to comprehend what she was seeing. This had to be a mistake. There was no way it could be real. Her fingers, still shaking, quickly scanned the details. The transfer was from Nick's corporate account, his name flashing on the screen like a cruel joke. $1 million. Full baby formula. Emily's world seemed to tilt. The walls of the apartment closed in around her as she struggled to breathe. She couldn't think, couldn't process what was happening. The phone buzzed again. Nick was still coming over. And this time, the weight of that realization crushed her. A sharp knock on the door shattered the stillness. Her heart pounded in her chest as she stared at the door, frozen in place. How had he gotten here so fast? Panic surged through her veins, but she couldn't move. Another knock, louder this time, echoed through the apartment. With shaking hands, Emily pushed herself off the sofa and walked to the door. Each step felt like it took her closer to something she wasn't ready for. Her breath was shallow as she reached for the doorknob, her hand cold against the metal. She opened the door slowly, only to find herself face to face with him. Nick. The man she had once loved, the man who had torn her heart apart, now standing in her doorway with a look in his eyes she couldn't quite place. His tailored suit looked expensive, his blue eyes sharp and calculating. His presence filled the doorway, and Emily felt small, insignificant in comparison. "Emily," he said, his voice a low rumble that made her knees weaken. "We need to talk." Her voice caught in her throat. She couldn't speak, couldn't even process the overwhelming mix of emotions flooding her mind. Anger, confusion, fear, but most of all, the overwhelming sense of betrayal. How could he just show up after all this time? How could he think he could waltz back into her life and everything would magically be okay? She started, but the words wouldn't come. He stepped inside without waiting for her to invite him. His sharp gaze swept over the apartment, taking in every detail: the cluttered coffee table, the worn sofa, the faded curtains. The small apartment felt even smaller with him standing there. The life they had built together now felt like a distant memory, one that had slipped through her fingers without her even realizing it. "What are you doing here?" she managed to ask, her voice barely above a whisper. "You needed help," he said simply. "And I'm here." She shook her head, trying to process the words, trying to make sense of what was happening. "Nick, this was a mistake," she stammered. "I didn't mean to send you that message. I didn't ask you for $1 million. He finished for her, his lips curving into a slight smile. "I know. But I sent it anyway." Her heart pounded in her chest, a dizzying mix of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. "Why?" she demanded, her voice sharper now. "Why are you doing this? You don't owe me anything." Nick's expression remained calm, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, something she couldn't name. Regret, guilt, but before she could analyze it, he spoke again, his voice firm, but not unkind. "I can," he said, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. Emily clenched her fists at her sides, frustration bubbling up inside her. "I don't need your charity, Nick. I've been doing just fine on my own," he interrupted her, his tone unwavering. "You have a daughter to take care of." "Our daughter." The words hit her like a slap. Our daughter. He hadn't called Lily that in years. Emily's throat tightened as she stared at him, disbelief and anger warring inside her. How dare he? How dare he show up after abandoning them both and act like he had a right to claim anything? "Lily is my responsibility," she said, her voice trembling with a mix of pride and fear. "Not yours." Nick's expression darkened. "She's mine too," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "And I'm not walking away this time." Emily's breath caught. What did that mean? What was he really saying? Before she could respond, another notification buzzed on her phone. It wasn't just $1 million, it was a list of transfers, one after another in rapid succession, each one totaling a staggering $5 million. The money was from Nick, each deposit accompanied by a message, "For Lily." Her mind raced, her thoughts a blur. What was happening? Why was he doing this? And what was he expecting in return? But before she could ask any of these questions, she looked up to find Nick standing there, watching her with an unreadable expression. "I'm fixing things," he said, his voice steady. But Emily couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than he was letting on. That Nick had a hidden agenda, and she wasn't sure she wanted to uncover it. Her heart thudded in her chest as she tried to steady her breath. This wasn't just about money, it never had been. It was about something far deeper, something far more dangerous. And Emily wasn't sure if she was ready to face it. The days following Nick's unexpected visit were a blur of confusion and unsettling emotions. Emily couldn't escape the feeling that something had shifted, that the sudden influx of money and Nick's reappearance were pieces to a puzzle she couldn't yet decipher. Every moment with Lily felt like a precious gift, but the weight of Nick's actions pressed heavily on her chest. The $5 million transfer was like a specter haunting her thoughts. Every time Emily tried to focus on something, whether it was Lily's needs or the bills stacked on the counter, the numbers on her phone screen blinked in her mind's eye, taunting her with their significance. The logical part of her mind kept screaming that this wasn't normal, that Nick was never this generous, never this involved. But then, the pragmatic part of her whispered that she couldn't afford to refuse. Not now, not with Lily's future at stake. As the days dragged on, Emily tried to settle into a sense of normalcy. She went to work, picked up groceries, and spent time with Lily, all the while keeping her thoughts at a careful distance from the strange new reality Nick had thrust upon them. But every time her phone buzzed with a new notification, another $5 million, another message from Nick, her heart would race, her stomach twisting in knots. Then came the phone call. It wasn't from Nick, but it might as well have been. The number on the screen was unfamiliar, but something about it set her nerves on edge. The area code was from a city Nick frequently traveled to for business, a place where his tech company had several partnerships. Emily's breath caught in her throat. She hesitated before answering, every cell in her body screaming to ignore it, to pretend it didn't exist. But curiosity, that insidious little voice inside her head, won out. "Hello," her voice was shaky, barely above a whisper. "Is this Emily Winters?" The voice on the other end was smooth, professional, but there was an underlying tone of something more, something that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. "Yes," Emily replied, trying to steady her breath, trying to sound composed, even though her heart was racing. "We're conducting an investigation on behalf of your ex-husband, Mr. Nick Winters," the voice continued, and her stomach twisted painfully. "It's urgent that we speak to you about some recent developments." The mention of Nick's name, paired with the word investigation, sent a cold chill down her spine. Emily's mind raced as the vague words lingered in the air. An investigation. What could he possibly want from her now? "I don't understand," she managed to say, her voice thick with confusion and dread. "What kind of investigation?" "The nature of the investigation is highly sensitive," the voice answered, its tone shifting slightly. We believe there may be something in your financial records that is crucial to the ongoing case. I'd suggest you come in for a meeting as soon as possible." Emily's pulse quickened. She hadn't done anything wrong, at least she didn't think she had. But Nick's name was wrapped around everything, and the phone call was just one more thread, pulling her deeper into his web. "I'm sorry, I don't think I can," she started, but the voice interrupted her. "You don't have a choice, Ms. Winters," the voice cut through. "This is important." The line went dead, and Emily was left staring at her phone in shock, the sensation of being trapped in a maze tightening around her. What had just happened? What did Nick have to do with this? And why was she suddenly thrust into the middle of an investigation that didn't seem to involve her in any way? Over the next few days, the phone calls and messages grew more frequent, more insistent. There were emails, letters, and even visits to her apartment, all coming from Nick's team or the mysterious investigators working on his behalf. It was like they were everywhere, hovering on the edge of her life, waiting for her to make the wrong move. And through it all, Nick remained strangely silent. He hadn't called her again. He hadn't tried to explain himself. It was as though he had set the wheels in motion and disappeared into the shadows, leaving Emily to handle the aftermath. Each time she tried to reach out to him, she was met with silence, like he was deliberately pulling away, keeping his distance. Her suspicion grew with each passing day. There was something off about this situation, something that didn't add up. Why had he suddenly showered her with money? Why had he reappeared in her life after all this time? And most importantly, what was the true motive behind the investigation that seemed to be centered around her? Her thoughts were interrupted one evening when Lily tugged at her sleeve, her innocent eyes wide with curiosity. "Mommy, why do you look so sad?" Emily smiled weakly, trying to hide the worrying from her face. She didn't want her daughter to see the fear creeping into her heart. "I'm just thinking, sweetie," she said softly. "Everything's okay," but as she held Lily close, the words didn't feel true. Nothing felt okay. It was the next day that things took a darker turn. Emily was sitting in the small living room, trying to ignore the ringing phone that had been constantly bombarding her. The stress of it all was overwhelming. But then, just as she was about to turn off her phone for a brief moment of peace, the doorbell rang. It wasn't the usual knock or ding of a delivery. This one was insistent, urgent. A cold shiver ran through Emily as she cautiously approached the door. Her heart pounded in her chest as she peered through the peephole. Standing on the other side was a man she didn't recognize. His face was tense, his suit impeccably pressed, but there was something about the way he carried himself that made her blood run cold. His eyes, dark and calculating, seemed to see right through the door. "Miss Winters," he said as soon as she opened the door, his voice low and authoritative. "I need to speak with you." Fear twisted in her stomach. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice shaky. "I'm here on behalf of Mr. Winters," the man replied smoothly, his eyes scanning the apartment behind her. "We've come to inform you of some developments that require your immediate attention." Her mind raced, every instinct telling her to slam the door and run. But instead, she stood frozen, caught between the need to protect herself and her growing curiosity. What could he possibly want from her now? And why was Nick, the man who had abandoned her, suddenly making his presence felt at every turn? "I'm not interested in whatever you're selling," she said, trying to sound braver than she felt. But the man's expression didn't change. "You should be," he said, his voice taking on a darker tone. "Because your entire life is about to change. And it's all connected to Nick Winters." The words hung in the air, pregnant with meaning. Emily felt her world tilt. Change, connected to Nick. What did that even mean? Before she could ask any more questions, The man turned and began to walk away. "I suggest you prepare yourself, Miss Winters," he said over his shoulder. "You won't have much time to react when the truth comes out." The door slammed shut behind him, but the weight of his words lingered in the air like a fog she couldn't shake. Emily's breath caught in her throat as her mind spun with possibilities. What was he talking about? What truth was he referring to? The puzzle pieces were starting to fall into place, but the picture they were forming was one Emily wasn't sure she wanted to see. And as she stared at the door, her phone buzzing incessantly in her hand, she realized that whatever Nick was hiding, whatever game he was playing, she was right at the center of it. And the worst part, she didn't know if she was strong enough to handle the truth when it was finally revealed. The days that followed were a blur of tension and uncertainty. Emily's every moment was consumed by the nagging feeling that something was terribly wrong, that she was standing on the precipice of a revelation that would change everything. The investigation, the strange man at her door, the cryptic messages that kept flooding her inbox. Each new piece of information only deepened the mystery, and the answers she desperately needed seemed more elusive than ever. She couldn't escape the nagging thought that Nick was at the center of it all. The man she had once loved, the man who had left her to raise their daughter alone, now had reappeared with promises of financial stability and a shadowy web of secrets. Every new piece of evidence raised more questions than answers. Why had he suddenly thrown so much money at her? What could possibly be the purpose behind it? And why was she now being dragged into a world of corporate intrigue, shady investigations, and dangerous games? Emily's mind spun as she tried to keep everything together. It wasn't just her own future she had to worry about now, it was Lily's, and with each passing day, the mounting pressure, the looming dread, became harder to shake off. The phone calls continued, the messages kept coming, more insistent, more alarming. A new letter arrived, marked with an ominous stamp, confidential. Inside was a cryptic note, typed in clean, impersonal letters. "The truth is closer than you think. Don't make a mistake. Your life depends on what you do next." It was signed by someone named Jay. Emily's blood ran cold when she saw it. She had never heard that name before, but it carried the weight of a threat in the way it was written. This wasn't just some business deal gone wrong, it felt like a warning, a message from a shadowy figure lurking just beyond her reach. As she paced the apartment late one night, clutching the letter in her trembling hands, her mind churned with possibilities. Nick's behavior had always been unpredictable, but this was different. This felt like something deeper, something darker. She needed answers. She had to know what was happening, and she was running out of time. The following morning, Emily took a step she never thought she would. She decided to go to Nick's office. She had resisted for days, telling herself it was better to stay out of his world, to keep her distance and protect herself and Lily from whatever game he was playing. But now, the stakes were higher. Her life was unraveling, and the only way to make sense of it was to confront Nick directly. Her heart hammered in her chest as she stood in front of the sleek glass building that housed his tech company. The polished exterior reflected the gray sky above, cold and unforgiving, just like the world Nick inhabited now. Emily had no illusions. She wasn't walking into a place of safety, she was stepping into the heart of a storm. She hesitated at the door, her hand lingering on the cold metal handle. 1,000 thoughts raced through her mind. What would she find inside? What had Nick been hiding all these years? And most importantly, what did he want from her now? The answer, whatever it was, would shape everything. With a deep breath, she pushed the door open and stepped inside. The sleek, minimalist lobby felt sterile and alien, like a world she no longer belonged to. The receptionist glanced up from her screen, her smile thin and professional. "Can I help you?" she asked. "I'm here to see Nick Winters," Emily replied, her voice steady despite the storm raging in her chest. The receptionist's expression flickered for a moment, a flash of recognition crossing her face before she masked it with a polite smile. "I'm sorry, Ms. Winters," she said, "but Mr. Winters is unavailable at the moment. He's in an important meeting. Would you like to leave a message?" Emily's heart sank, but she refused to back down. "I need to see him. It's urgent." The receptionist's eyes narrowed, and for the first time, Emily sensed something more than just a professional barrier. There was something guarded in the woman's demeanor. "I'll see what I can do," the receptionist said, her voice cool, as she picked up the phone. The seconds stretched into what felt like an eternity. Emily felt like a fly caught in a web, trapped by forces beyond her understanding. What had Nick gotten himself into? Why was everyone so tight-lipped, so careful in their words? She was drowning in a sea of half-truths, and no one was offering her a life raft. Finally, the receptionist looked up from the phone, her face unreadable. "Mr. Winters will see you now," she said, and motioned for Emily to follow. Emily's legs were shaky as she walked down the long, sterile hallway, each step echoing in the silence that seemed to hang in the air. She had no idea what to expect when she walked into that office. She had no idea if she would find Nick, or if she would discover something far worse, but she knew she had to face him. She had no choice, for Lily, for herself. The door to the office opened with a soft click, and there he was, Nick, sitting behind his large, polished desk, dressed in a sharp suit, his face a mask of calm composure. He didn't look surprised to see her. In fact, he looked almost relieved. "Emily," he said, his voice smooth but distant, "I was wondering when you'd come." She didn't sit down, she couldn't. The tension in the room was thick, suffocating. Emily's heart was pounding in her ears as she glared at him, trying to contain the surge of emotions bubbling up inside her. Anger, fear, betrayal all swirling together into a storm. "What's going on, Nick?" Her voice trembled despite her best efforts. "What is all of this? The money, the messages, the investigation. Why are you doing this to me, to Lily?" Nick's expression faltered for a moment, just a flicker, but it was enough to tell Emily that something was off. The man in front of her wasn't the confident, self-assured businessman he appeared to be. No, there was something else lurking beneath the surface, something dark and dangerous. "I didn't want to drag you into this," he said slowly, his voice dropping, "but I didn't have a choice. There's a lot at stake here, Emily. Things are more complicated than you can imagine." "Complicated?" she echoed, her voice rising in disbelief. "You come into my life, throw money at me, and then disappear without a word. And now you expect me to believe that this is all complicated?" Nick's eyes darkened, and for the first time, Emily saw something she hadn't noticed before: guilt. His perfect facade cracked just a little, revealing the man beneath the business persona. "I'm trying to protect you, Emily," he said quietly, his voice raw with something that might have been regret. "I never wanted any of this to happen, but it's too late now." "Protect me?" Emily's voice was a sharp edge. "From what, Nick? What are you hiding?" The silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Nick seemed to be weighing his words carefully, as if deciding how much to reveal. Finally, he spoke. "There are people involved, people who are dangerous. I can't explain everything right now, but I need you to trust me. I never wanted you to be a part of this world, but now, there's no way out." The words hung in the air, pregnant with meaning. Emily's mind raced. Was Nick really trying to protect her? Or was this all part of a bigger, more sinister plan? And what was this world he was talking about? The pieces were beginning to fall into place, but the picture they painted was one she wasn't sure she could bear to see. "You need to leave, Emily," Nick said suddenly, his voice more insistent. "It's not safe for you here anymore. Go home, take Lily and leave." "I'll handle this." "Handle what?" Emily's voice cracked, her frustration rising. "Handle what, Nick? I deserve to know what's going on. I'm done being kept in the dark." But Nick was already standing, his posture rigid, his eyes desperate. "You don't understand, Emily. You can't know everything, not yet." And with those words, Emily realized just how deep the rabbit hole went. She was no longer just a spectator in this dangerous game. She was a player, and she didn't even know the rules. The weight of Nick's words hung over Emily like a thick, suffocating fog. "You don't understand, Emily. You can't know everything. Not yet." The finality in his voice sent a chill down her spine, as if the door to the truth was now sealed tighter than ever. But despite his warnings, Emily refused to back down. The truth, no matter how dark or dangerous, had to be uncovered. She wasn't going to let Nick, her ex-husband, the father of her child, shove her back into the shadows while he danced in the light of his secrets. She wasn't some passive bystander in a story she couldn't control. She was a mother, a woman who had survived far too much to let anyone take control of her life again. Her mind raced, trying to piece together the fragmented puzzle of the past few days. The investigation, the cryptic messages, the strange figures she had seen lurking near her apartment. It was clear now that something much bigger was at play, a web of lies, danger, and manipulation that reached far beyond the personal vendetta she had assumed it to be. Nick had said it himself. There are people involved, people who are dangerous, but who were these people? And what exactly had Nick gotten himself entangled in? As the hours passed in a blur of uncertainty, Emily made a decision that she knew would change everything. She was going to find out the truth, no matter the cost. She couldn't wait for Nick's cryptic words to lead her somewhere safe. She had to take control of her own fate. The problem was, she didn't know where to start. Her mind swirled with possibilities, but each trail led to a dead end, or worse, deeper into danger. The messages, the people who had been watching her, the feeling that she was constantly being shadowed. It was like being stuck in a nightmare where no one could be trusted. Then, late one evening, an unexpected breakthrough came. Emily received a phone call from an anonymous number, one she had learned to dread over the past few weeks. "Emily," a voice crackled on the other end, deep, undistorted. "You don't know how deep this goes, do you? Nick has made a mistake. And so have you." The hairs on the back of Emily's neck stood on end. "A mistake? What mistake?" The voice on the other end of the phone didn't give her time to respond. "If you want to survive, you'll need to leave. Go to the address I'm sending you. It's time to stop asking questions and start making decisions." Before she could speak, the line went dead. Her heart raced, her pulse quickening in a mixture of fear and curiosity. This was no random prank, this was a warning. And if she didn't heed it, she would pay the price. The same price, perhaps, that Nick was about to pay. A text followed moments later, the address pinging on her screen. It was a location she recognized, an abandoned building on the outskirts of the city, a place she had driven by many times, but never ventured into. The hairs on her arm stood up as she stared at the text. Whoever this person was, they had a chilling amount of knowledge about her life. And about Nick's. Despite the danger, Emily didn't hesitate. She couldn't afford to. She grabbed her coat and keys, her breath coming in shallow bursts, her mind a whirlpool of doubt and dread. Was she walking into a trap, or was this the only chance she had to find out what Nick had been hiding from her all this time. As the headlights of her car cut through the night, Emily's thoughts raced faster than the city streets. She sped down. She had always told herself that she wouldn't let fear control her life, but tonight was different. Tonight everything was on the line. There was no going back. When she reached the address, her stomach turned into a tight knot. The building loomed in the distance, its broken windows casting eerie shadows in the dim light. Emily parked her car a few blocks away and walked the rest of the way, her steps slow and cautious. She could hear her heartbeat in her ears, each footstep echoing against the concrete like a warning. The air felt colder as she neared the building, the weight of the moment bearing down on her with every step. The front door creaked as she pushed it open, revealing a dark, cavernous interior. The smell of dust and decay hung in the air. Emily's eyes adjusted to the darkness as she ventured further inside, her heart thudding against her chest. The silence was deafening, broken only by the distant sound of dripping water. Then, she saw him. Nick. He was standing at the center of the room, his back to her, looking smaller, more vulnerable than she had ever seen him. His normally confident demeanor had crumbled, replaced by something else, something that looked like fear. Nick, Emily whispered, her voice cracking with disbelief. What is this? What's going on? He turned slowly, his face pale, his eyes wide with panic. Emily, you shouldn't be here, but it was too late. The moment she had walked into the building, the trap had been set. From the shadows, several men emerged, their faces hidden in the dim light. Their eyes looked onto her, and Emily felt an icy chill run through her veins. Nick's voice was low, pleading, "You need to leave now. Please, it's not safe." But Emily wasn't leaving. Not now, not when the truth was finally within her grasp. "Who are they, Nick?" she demanded. "What's going on? What have you gotten yourself into?" Nick's expression faltered, and for a brief moment, she saw a flicker of guilt cross his face. But then it was gone, replaced by the cold mask of someone who had made far too many dangerous deals to back out now. "I didn't want you involved in this, Emily," he said quietly, his voice shaking. "But I can't protect you anymore. You're in too deep, too deep." Emily's voice cracked. "What are you talking about?" Before Nick could respond, one of the men stepped forward. He was tall, imposing, his features hidden beneath a black hoodie. He spoke with a low, gravelly voice that sent shivers down Emily's spine. "You need to listen, Miss Winters," the man said, his tone firm, but not unkind. "Your husband is in more trouble than you can imagine, and if you want to survive, you'll stay out of it." Emily's stomach churned as the weight of his words sunk in. Her husband, Nick, had never been her husband in the eyes of the law. He had abandoned her long ago, so why was he being called her husband? The man's eyes softened slightly as he saw the confusion on her face. "Nick is deep into something that could destroy us all, Miss Winters. And he's been dragging you along for the ride without you even knowing." Nick's face twisted in anguish as he realized the truth. "Emily, please," he begged, his voice breaking. "I didn't want this to happen. I thought I could protect you, but I was wrong. It's too late now." The walls seemed to close in on Emily as she absorbed the gravity of the situation. The pieces were finally coming together, the shadowy figures, the cryptic warnings, the bizarre messages. Nick wasn't just hiding from her. He was hiding from something much bigger and more dangerous. She was standing on the edge of a precipice, staring into a chasm of secrets and lies. She could feel the cold eyes of the men on her, but the room was spinning. Everything she had known about her life, the simple, a normal life she had built, was crumbling before her eyes. And the person who had once been her anchor, her support, was now just another player in a deadly game that had spiraled completely out of control. I don't know what to do anymore, Emily, Nick said, his voice barely audible. But I know that if you stay here, you'll be dragged into this too. The man stepped forward, his eyes piercing, as he addressed Emily. You have one choice now: leave this place, leave him behind. Because if you stay, there's no coming back. Emily felt a chill as she realized that this wasn't just a game. This was life or death, and she had to choose.